very good. That's lovely.
Every single school in the London Borough of Merton served meals like this. And this isn't just a one-off worst-case photo. I have an album full of pictures of children being fed by the state, not a single piece of fruit or veg. Absolutely, children on free school meals receiving food like this on a daily basis. And that's what first got me involved with, public food. Now, and that's why we set up a parent group, because I am a teacher, and as a teacher I had complained bitterly about that food. I was at a school that had healthy school status that served food like that, and actually as a teacher I achieved nothing. It was only when we worked as parents and we set up a parent group that actually we managed to change that situation, and we persuaded our council to build kitchens in every single school, and we kicked out the old contractors, and we as parents ended up rewriting the contract specifications so that we could ensure that never happens again in Merton. Now the parents that got involved in that campaign didn't do it because they were interested in public procurement. Absolutely not. They did it because they wanted to see decent food on the plate. And we found out the only way to get decent food on the plate was actually by taking control of it ourselves. Now the state clearly has a duty of care to children in their care. When you hand over your precious children at the age of 4 to go to a school, the very least that institution has to do is to guarantee that it will meet its basic needs of being able to go to the toilet, we have to have fresh drinking water, and that it won't be fed a meal that will actually harm it. And we had parents telling us of how their kids would eat fruit and veg before they started at school, and then not once having fed that. Anyway, part of the thing I want to say today is that parents aren't the problem. And actually they can be part of the solution. Now I know there are lots of issues of parents who were denied a food education themselves at school. They didn't get decent cookery lessons. They were sold the myth that actually convenience food would solve everything and that the market would sort them out. And so I don't think it's fair to blame all parents for the state of the food. I think the problem is the food industry has got its grips into everything. But actually, we can work with them. But what we can't do is rely on them to do it for us. And I will wrap up by saying we need to know what we want. And obviously we need nutritionists, we need dietitians, but we need a basic view of what we want in our public schools, and once we win people to that, we will make it happen. We will find the ways, we will set up the systems, but getting the public will to do it is first, and we fight for it. And it's really, really important that it all happens at the top and there are those policy things, but actually in the schools, in the hospitals, in the patient groups, in the parent groups, in the PTAs with the governors, there is a real will to get rid of junk like that, and we actually need to fight it. And if I'm honest with you, it was easier getting rid of the food in Merton like that than it was moaning about it for the years that I did beforehand.
Actually, I'm just going to qualify the reason why I'm here. One of the jobs I do, the reason why I'm dressed like the in-house doctor here is because I'm executive head chef. But behind the scenes, I've actually formed a group of about 4 universities together now. We formed a group called the Nutrition Research Group. And we are essentially looking to prove that diets enhance well-being will decrease patient recovery times in hospital. Now, it's actually quite a large subject, so we are taking a small cross-section of the population here and trying to work out and see whether this is actually true. It's a little bit of a no-brainer, really, but it's a little bit sad. From what we've found so far, from the research we've done so far, there doesn't seem to be anything conclusive. There doesn't seem to be a multidisciplinary drive to actually try and prove this. And it actually makes common sense. I do a lot of stuff with the World Cancer Research Fund, and for instance, the evidence would suggest that they've sort of found out with working with the United Nations, the World Health Organization, etc., who overlook them, that about 40% of cancers can be prevented through diet. And yet in the UK, I think about 98% of research is on drugs, which doesn't add up. You can go down to the supermarket then and fight off 40% of cancers. So there's one thing. So that's the reason why I'm here. Personally, for me, I think one of the biggest problems that we have is the psychology of what we're talking about here. And if you actually tell somebody that they're going to have to eat more healthily, then they're not really going to do that. Otherwise, the 5-a-day campaign would work. I don't think it necessarily... I think it's made a difference, certainly it's made a difference, but I don't necessarily think it's worked. My idea is this, is if Mohammed won't go to the mountain, take the mountain to Mohammed. So what we are looking to do is essentially say, look, is it possible to make a beef burger or chips 50% more healthier than it is now? And if it is, then let's look into that. Because the chances are, if, for instance, we can do this now, I can give you a chocolate eclair, just as a brief example, a chocolate eclair with no gluten, no sugar, no dairy in it. It tastes and looks exactly the same as the full-fat variety you would get with all the sugars and all the badness in the supermarket. Why wouldn't you buy that if, in a blind tasting test, you said it didn't taste any different? Now, our angle is to say, or one of the reasons we're looking into this is to essentially understand this, why people aren't eating healthily, why they're not following the 5-a-day. And one of the things I think, or one of the ways we got around it with a recipe book I did with the World Cancer Research Fund, was they asked me to produce 5 recipes that were using less meat than what we would normally do, because it's part of their campaign. So simple things that you would do in the home. So I was like, okay, like spaghetti bolognese. Okay, that's an interesting one. Spaghetti bolognese is basically tomatoes and minced beef, and that's pretty much it is in there, obviously the spaghetti. So the way we got around that, that you can simply do in the home, is in actual fact, get some fennel, get some carrots, get some other vegetables, cook them the same size as the mince. When you cook them, they exactly have the same texture as the mince, so thereby you can actually replace mince, 50% of the meat, the beef, with the chopped vegetables that are cut the same size as the mince, and the mouthfeel is exactly the same. In a blind taste test, mask on, you wouldn't know the difference between the two. But the point is, you're actually getting more minerals and vitamins, or more of a balance, let's say, by incorporating the vegetables in that way. And that was just a simplistic thing like a spaghetti bolognese, with the eclairs and the other things that we're playing around with, and the beef burgers that we're the sort of McDonald's beef burger things that we're experimenting with is the next step. So I think there's a massive psychological issue behind everything we're doing, and I think it's very easy to say, well, we don't want this, we want this, but I think there are massive economic implications in that, and I just think there needs to be more multidisciplinary cross-pollination of ideas.
Turkey with Twizzlers, I think, revealed what was going on in our food system. So I'm profoundly grateful to them for being quite so ghastly. If they had been any better, we might not be in the state of questioning food quality in this country. So I will now put on a hat that is perhaps slightly different from the other people on the panel and say I come from the land of bureaucrats. I come from the land of people in grey suits, the land of people who are bean counters. I've spent the last few weeks at the beginnings of the launch of a public sector food procurement campaign, and if anybody can think of a better name for it, we'd be very up for it, to say, what the hell are we doing with public food if we can't get it right in terms of the environment and people's health? Why are we spending £2 billion investing in heart disease and climate change? £2 billion could be spent on solving it every year, and surely we have a responsibility to spend it in a way that creates decent working conditions, good animal welfare, doesn't put endangered species of fish on public plates, that supports good farmers who are doing good things for the soil, that are creating healthy dishes that people can really enjoy, creating that as an opportunity for education, for people really coming into contact with food that they've lost contact with, that they haven't necessarily experienced. What I'm very excited about is that over the past 10 years I've been working on a lot of food issues, a lot of campaign issues, and I've tended to have to take a very negative attitude because I'm going into places like the Office of Government and Commerce. Not a very well-known phrase. It is a department that makes most of the decisions about how those £2 billion will be spent. And at the moment they are deciding to cut it as much as possible, to cut out the animal welfare, to cut out the environmental standards. Of course, they'll say that they're continuing to pursue that, but how can they when Mandelson, for example, is saying that cost-cutting must be the only measure? We have to start getting serious about our campaigning, and it's fantastic to have so many people talking about it in all of the different cultural ways that we're now saying it, in all of the different languages. It might be about food quality and nutrition, it might be about parents getting angry, it might be about training public sector caterers, using public money well to train those people. How fantastic is that?
Okay, we're going to start now, if that's all right. We've given the stragglers time to straggle. So, my name is Tim Lang, and I'm Professor of Food Policy at City University here in London, where I head up a Centre for Food Policy. I've been asked to chair this. I'm going to introduce our panel, then I'm going to just say a few words before they then speak. On my right, your left, Rosie Boycott, who's head of London Food, standing in for Mike Duckett of the Royal Brompton, who is unfortunately ill, seriously ill, being rushed into hospital, but he's okay apparently, is Jackie Schneider. So a gender change here. Jackie very kindly from Merton Parents, a sort of good activist and teacher on public policy. Extreme left over here, your right, Kath Dalmini from Sustain, who is all things to all people. And hastily, Chris Horridge from Cliveden House, which is where the bourgeoisie cavorted and caused scandals endlessly for 60 years. And they still do. So we'll hear all of this in the name of public institutional food later. Okay, just to sort of tease you into what the topic is here. What we're meeting to talk about is, the title, in case you've come to the wrong meeting, in which case go gently now, is Feeding People in Public Institutions. This is a very interesting and extremely unsexy topic over the last 10, 15, 20 years. But it's a topic and an issue which is coming back into mainstream public policy and commercial policy. It's an issue which used to be at the forefront of trying to think through where food went. So it's returning, it's not new. In the 1980s, public food essentially went off the agenda because the political ethos was privatization. School meals were privatized, hospital meals were privatized, even prison food was privatized. But in the 1990s, on the back of public health evidence, some beginnings of concern about social inequalities, public food began to creep back onto the agenda, not least due to the work of Sustain, as it was then called the National Food Alliance, which Kath is here representing, and long-term campaigning about issues like school meals, that Jackie will talk about, no doubt. And in the 2000s, reforms of public food came onto serious mainstream political agenda. There was a resuscitation of school meals standards, which had been abolished in 1980. Sections 22 and 23 of the School Meals of the Education Act in 1980 abolished nutrition standards that had been put in place in 1944 by a conservative Minister of Education and had been reinforced by all party governments ever since. So in the 2000s, we've got it coming back on the agenda in a big way. The 2010s, most of us think, and I suspect all of us here think, it's going to be about mixing public health agenda, sustainability, and international issues of equity and trade and availability, issues like food security. So there's a fast evolving agenda. If you think of that in 4 decades, the agenda has shifted dramatically. So this is an extremely timely meeting. What's at stake? I think we think it's about money. £2 billion of our taxpayers' money is spent on public food. It's the credit crunch. Finances are being squeezed. Trillions of money is being thrown at bankers. Without any doubt, there's going to be pressure on the public purse to reduce public institutions, and public food might be squeezed by that. There are some issues of practicalities and skills. Rosie's been wonderful on this, pushing it in London, trying to get new projects celebrating skills. It's a cultural issue that I'm sure Chris will talk about. You can produce wonderful food in a hospital or in a hotel or a school, but if people won't eat it, what do you do? There's the politics of it. Are governments going to support? What are the political parties' different positions on it? But I think above all, it's an issue where we would all, I think, agree, and I suspect most of you, but who knows, it's up to you. There's going to be an issue about change, how to manage the change, how to get everyone to move. There was a friend of mine from Cumbria, or what used to be the Lake District, says you can't sort things out unless everyone's on the same mat. Are we all on the same mat on public food? So that's what we're going to be debating about. I hope that sort of got us all onto roughly the same mat, but I'm very happy if others want to say different things. So with no more ado, first with Rosie.
Hi, can you hear me? Thank you. I mean, the first thing I'd like to say about public food is that about 6 years ago when I broke my leg, I spent a lot of time in hospital, and the one thing that I found absolutely essential to take with me was a jar of tomato ketchup, so that I could smother every single meal in the stuff in order to get it down my throat, because quite frankly it was both pretty unpalatable and extremely unhealthy, and almost no vegetables or fresh salads or fresh fruit were served. But it is encouraging, and in the short time I've been chair of the London Food Board, I mean, I've been seeing a lot of initiatives, and as Tim says, I think we are all slowly getting onto the same map, and the government has woken up to the need that public institutions, almost over and above everything, because they are the most massive consumers of food, have to do something about their offering if we're not going to have the runaway obesity and diabetes and ill health and what happens to kids in schools in terms of ADT, which I'm sure Jackie will talk about. And we will see the magical effect that feeding people decent food can have on them, and especially can have on young children. What in the London Food Board we've been doing is that, first of all, we have to say, well, you've got to get good food into the right places where the public institutions can buy it. So we do a lot of work with the markets, with reconfiguring them, and then with building hubs around London so that the smaller producers can get access with fresh, locally sourced, seasonal food that is really healthy and get it into the capital. So we work with smaller groups, we work with the transport so that we have low emissions and electric vehicles bringing it in. And this is something that I'm hoping over the next 3 years we will rapidly expand, and that if I could wave my wand and have a vision, I'd have a food hub every 40 miles around the M25 roughly, so that there'd be a continuous supply coming into the markets. As the Food Board, we've also funded people in all the main markets so that they're there to help the smaller producer who's giving us really local and seasonal and good food. But of course, there's no point in having the good food again unless you also provide some level of training. That's not just because food waste is massive, and what that comes down to is bad catering, buying too much, buying the wrong thing, and ending up in landfill. And as we all know, food contributes a massive 40% to our emissions, our CO2 emissions in this country. So it's one area where we can really, really work towards mitigating climate changes by changing our weird and strange and cumbersome food system. One of the projects we've been particularly behind is something called School Food in Greenwich, run by Claire Pritchard. And Claire does a wonderful thing of creating gardens in schools where the kids cook, and then they bring their parents in to cook with them. But more than that, she's trained now over 1,000 public sector chefs in how to produce good food at a reasonable price, because people go on about saying, well, there's the credit crunch and the government are going to cut down on food. The reality is we can't afford to cut down the bills on good food, because we get the bills coming back at us later in terms of extra healthcare and all the things that go wrong with kids when they have a bad diet. So we have to do it, but also it doesn't have to cost the earth if you know what you're doing and you know how to cook. And you realise that you can get just as much out of pulses and lentils as without having to necessarily supply processed meat, which we all eat too much of anyway. So I think that we have to see this as part of a cultural thing. I mean, I was glad that Tim said the word public procurement is extremely unsexy. Unfortunately, it is. On the whole, people are much more interested in hearing about events like today and farmers markets and sort of new types of cheese than they are about hearing, well, how do we supply our hospitals and our schools? But actually, that's really where the big cultural shifts have to happen, because when they can happen at that point, then they will genuinely ripple out across the whole country. So that's my bit. I'm going to pass you over to Jackie for that.